All right, so today I'm going to be talking about MVC in Java. MVC stands for Model View and Controller. Now, what this does is the model is where we're going to have our object and basically the code to implement our object. So this is where we're going to create our objects for an object. And so this is basically going to be where we're going to be passing data to create an object, such as a student or a player, uh, some kind of object that we're creating. And this is going to allow us to create data for that object. And then we have the view. The view is just the representation of the data from the model. So this is basically, I think, going to be the output to the user that represents the data from the model. And then we have the controller. Now, what the controller does is the controller allows us to interact with the model and the view. So what happens is you have data in the model that gets sent into the controller. The controller takes that data from the model, then sends it to the view. And basically, this program allows us to separate a program out. The MVC allows us to separate a program out so that instead of having it all our program in just one file or in one program, we can have it into 3 separate programs, and we're just going to connect the programs through the controller. The example I did, I started with the model, and I created the model first. If I can find it. Right there. And so what I did is I created a model, and I based it off a player, and I basically created a class called model because we're creating a model. The class name can be anything, but I just named it model because I'm trying to do an example. And then I created a variable number and a variable name. And then I did a get number, and then I got a set number, and I did a get name and I set name. That way we can retrieve data for the player. And then after that, I created my view. And my view is basically going to take that data from the model, and it's going to basically display it to the users what my view does. And then after that, I created my controller. That way I have an interaction between my model and my view. And so to create my controller is I first did a public class controller. Now that name can be anything. I just named it controller. And then I created a variable called model and a variable called view. And then I created a controller, and I called the model and I called the view. And then I basically am going to set the player name, because we're basically, this is calling the player name from the model. So I set the player name from the model, and I get player name from the model. And then I also set the player number from the model, and I get the player number from the model. Then I update the view. And so what this does is it takes this right here, takes this information, and then it passes it to the view. And that's what the update view does. And then after that is to test my program, I created just a regular file, and I named it player. And so when I create this file, I create a player, and I have it so that I can enter player one name. So I can enter player one's name, and then basically it sends it to the controller right here. And then I created the number, and this is going to be player number one, and that sends it to the controller. And then I update the view. it sends it to the controller and then updates the view. And down here, I basically created another model, and I called it retrieve player info. And I basically created a player 2 information with a name of computer and number 2. And so when I created this and I ran it, it passed this information to the model. The model created the data for these players. Then it sent it to the controller, and the controller took that data, and then it sent it to the view, and the view displayed it to the user. And that is MVC for Java.